Has a doctor ever refused to treat you? Sounds ridiculous, right? Like walking into a salon and the stylist saying, "Your hair's too tangled, I'm out." But that's exactly what happened to me. I walked into the ER, doubled over in pain, and got treated like I was just begging for free concert tickets. Never in my life have I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time for being labeled a drama queen right there on a hospital bed. And want to know how the story twists from there? You might end up mad, laughing, and relieved all at once when you hear the rest. Let me walk you through this entire medical soap opera. After 50, your body turns into an old car. Every few weeks, another part breaks down. That's a line I once heard somewhere. I used to teach medicine, standing at the lectern with slides about the natural aging process. But honestly, I never imagined I'd become the living illustration for my own lecture. That night, at 2 a.m., I was doubled over on the couch, sweating like I'd just run a marathon through the Texas desert. My daughter, Sophie, well, not exactly a little girl anymore, she's 28 and stubborn as a mule, saw me clutching my stomach and groaning, then yelled, "Mom, you look like you just lost a statewide taco eating contest. We're going to the hospital right now." I didn't have the strength to argue. Every spasm felt like a punch from the inside, and trust me, I once cracked a rib doing yoga. This pain was worse. Sophie tossed her hoodie over me and hauled me out to the car. We sped off into the Austin night, down empty streets filled only with chirping crickets and the occasional late-night liquor truck. At the hospital entrance, I had to cling to Sophie just to walk. All I could think was, well, life sure has a sense of humor. I used to stand in a med school lecture hall, teaching about ethics, preaching how doctors should listen to patients. And now here I am, the patient, looking like some pitiful old lady lost in a sitcom. We stepped into the ER, the smell of disinfectant mixed with the greasy burrito scent from the vending machine. I muttered to myself, perfect. If the stomach pain doesn't kill me, the smell of cheap food at 2 a.m. just might. The nurse sat me down, asked a few half-hearted questions, then left me to wait. I sat there clutching my stomach, looking around. A guy arguing with his girlfriend on the phone, an old man snoring like thunder, and a kid screaming like a fire alarm. If there were an award for most chaotic waiting room in America, this hospital would win, hands down. Finally, after 2 hours that felt like a lifetime, I was called in to see the on-call doctor. The door swung open, and in walked Dr. Colin Graves, the textbook villain in a medical drama. Hair slicked back with gel, lab coat crisp and reeking of fabric starch, and a smug face like he'd just won the prize for most in love with himself in Austin. He glanced me up and down, didn't even bother to check my pulse, and declared, "You're just stressed. Go on a diet, exercise more, don't worry." I wanted to laugh, but the pain in my stomach came out sounding more like a truck slamming on its brakes. In my head, the snarky voice was screaming, "Sorry, Dr. Perfect, but I didn't drive all the way here just to sit through a Weight Watchers lecture." Sophie, on the other hand, was about to explode. She snapped, "My mom's in so much pain she's sweating, and you think it's just stress?" Colin shrugged, like he'd just been asked the dumbest question in the world. "She's walking around fine, doesn't look urgent to me. People always think they're dying when all they really need is some rest." At that moment, I was both furious and amused. Furious at being dismissed, amused because I remembered how I used to lecture med students, never judge a patient by appearances. And now here I was, facing one of the defective copies of medical education, botching the very lesson I once taught. Irony level, 100 out of 100. I wanted to scream at him, "Hey, I used to grade clinical exams 100 times tougher than whatever you're doing right now." But with pain tearing through my insides, all I managed were a few weak syllables. I sat there, sweat pouring down, seething yet helpless, with just enough breath left to think. "Okay, Hannah, welcome to the official drama night of your life. And the star of the show this time, your stubborn old intestines." Colin didn't stop at "go on a diet." No, he launched straight into a one-man show of self-proclaimed prophecy. His voice was loud enough for the whole room to hear. "This is your classic patient. Imagines the pain, thinks they're dying, but really all they need is a cup of chamomile tea." I wanted to punch him, but instead I doubled over, clutching my stomach. Then he glanced at Sophie and smirked. "Let me guess, your mom spends too much time in Facebook health groups. Patients like that always come in here, self-diagnosing cancer or appendicitis, demanding pain meds." He even let out a mocking chuckle. like my cold sweat and agony were just a lousy audition for some low-budget reality show. Sophie's face turned red, ready to snap back, but I grabbed her hand, signaling for silence. I knew arguing wouldn't help, just a waste of precious oxygen I was already running low on. I locked eyes with Colin, my voice breaking. I know my own body. Something is really wrong. Colin folded his arms, sighing like he was too busy to care. He turned to the nurse, typing notes, and said loudly, "Record, patient shows drug-seeking behavior. Most likely psychological, not medical." Hearing that, I wanted to roll off the bed and go hunt down another doctor. But the pain clenched tighter, making me shiver. I forced out the words, "Please, run a blood test or a scan, anything." Colin chuckled, leaning down close to my face. "If I give you a test tonight, tomorrow you'll be back asking for a full-body MRI. Do you know how many patients like you I've seen? They call it frequent flyer, people who bounce in and out of the ER just looking for attention." The whole room went silent, only the sound of the keyboard clicking filled the air. I noticed a young nurse, her badge reading Marisol Vega, hesitating. Her eyes betrayed discomfort, but her lips stayed pressed shut. Our eyes met, a flicker of fragile hope. But then Marisol turned away, pretending to adjust the monitor. I understood. She was still too new, too afraid of being labeled difficult by her boss. I started trembling. Sophie's hoodie was soaked with my sweat, and the pain felt like someone was twisting a knife straight into my stomach. I nearly collapsed against the edge of the bed. Instead of showing concern, Colin smirked and said, "Well, that's some method acting. If Hollywood runs out of actors, you've got a shot." I heard a couple of awkward coughs from the staff, like they were trying to break the tension. Nobody laughed, but nobody dared speak up either. I clenched my teeth, fighting back tears. I'd been through dozens of life-or-death surgeries. I'd stood in front of lecture halls with hundreds of students. But under that cold, dismissive stare, I felt small, powerless, and humiliated. Colin kept monologuing, as if he wanted to turn me into the poster child for medical dramatization. "Take a good look, folks. This is the problem with our healthcare system. Imaginary patients, wasting time in hospital beds. Sad, really, but I've got an actual emergency in the next room." I wanted to scream that he was wrong, that I wasn't faking. But all that came out of my mouth was a faint groan, so weak I wasn't even sure anyone heard it. I clutched the side of the bed, my mind circling one desperate thought. If I collapse right here, will anyone believe I'm really in pain? I clung to the side of the bed, trying to stay conscious for just one more minute, but my body betrayed me. A sharp pain shot through me like an electric surge, and then everything went black. I collapsed onto the cold ER floor, faintly hearing Sophie scream my name. My whole body shook. My breath came in ragged gasps, like someone was twisting my intestines tighter and tighter. Through the chaos of sounds, Colin's voice cut in, dry and annoyed. "Call security. Get her out. This bed's for real patients." Hearing that, I swear I wanted to spring up and slap him across the face, but I didn't even have the strength to open my eyes. All I felt was a nurse's cold hand lightly touch my wrist, then pull away, as if afraid of being dragged into it. Sophie screamed, "My mom is unconscious? Are you people insane?" But Colin doubled down. "This is dramatization. Don't be fooled." I heard the heavy footsteps of security entering, the air so tense it felt like a fight was about to break out. Then suddenly, a sharp, familiar voice cut through. "What the hell is going on here?" I forced my eyes open, hazy through the fog of pain, and saw a face I never expected. Dr. Anthony Reed, the night shift lead physician and one of my former students from over 20 years ago. He strode over, dropped to his knees beside me. "My God, Dr. Brooks?" I had never seen eyes shift from shock to alarm so fast. He pressed lightly on my abdomen, and with just one touch I nearly screamed. He immediately turned to the room. "Prep the OR now. I'm suspecting small bowel volvulus. Blood flow is cut off. This is a level 1 emergency." The whole room jolted. Nurses who had stayed silent suddenly sprang into action. One rushed to call surgery, another wheeled over a gurney. I saw Sophie bury her face in her hands, sobbing, and for the first time in hours, I knew my daughter finally had proof her mom wasn't faking it. Colin's face turned beet red as he stammered, "No, no way. She's just looking for attention." Reed spun around, his voice cutting through the air so sharply the entire room froze. "Shut up. If I'd come any later, she'd be dead on this floor. From this moment on, you don't touch this patient again." My heart pounded wildly, whether from pain or sheer relief, I couldn't tell. A ridiculous thought flickered through my brain. Dear God, I'm on the verge of dying, and I still want to high-five the universe because Reed showed up in time. They lifted me onto the gurney, every movement setting my stomach on fire. I heard Reed barking orders non-stop. Get anesthesia down here now. Prep blood. Have the OR ready in 10 minutes. This is life-saving. Colin stepped back, clutching his clipboard like it was a shield. His face had gone pale, lips pressed tight as if he'd just bitten into a lemon. I caught his eyes flicker over me, not with arrogance this time, but fear. The fear of someone just publicly exposed. Sophie ran alongside the bed, gripping my hand, crying and whispering, "Mom, you're gonna be okay. They're saving you." I wanted to answer, maybe crack a joke like, "Yeah, first time I've been this famous, huh?" But all I managed was a weak squeeze of her hand. As the gurney rolled down the hallway, I caught the whispers behind me. One nurse murmured, "She used to be a med school professor." Another whispered, "God, we almost left her to die." The air was so heavy that every squeak of the gurney wheels echoed like a drumbeat. I stared up at the blinding white ceiling, neon lights flashing past tile by tile, and in that moment I felt both despair and absurd humor. Humor because my life had nearly hung by a thread, thanks to one arrogant young doctor who thought he knew everything. Despair because I knew, if they'd been just a few minutes later, I might not be here to tell this story. When I woke up, the soft white light of the ICU felt like it was drilling straight into my skull. My mouth was parched, my throat raw, and my stomach felt weighed down as if a block of concrete had been laid on top of me. I tilted my head just enough to see the IV lines, the monitors, and my daughter slumped asleep in a chair, her hoodie crumpled around her. The steady rhythm of her breathing was the only proof I wasn't lying in a morgue. A nurse walked over and spoke gently. "Welcome back, Dr. Brooks. The surgery took 3.5 hours. Luckily, we got to it in time, but part of your intestine had become necrotic, and we had to remove it." Hearing that, my heart clenched, not from the physical pain, but from the horror. Because of the delay, a piece of my body was gone forever. A few hours later, once I was a bit more lucid, Dr. Reed came in. His face showed exhaustion, but his voice was firm. "If we'd been 2 or 3 hours later, you wouldn't have made it. I'm sorry, Hannah. What happened to you was unacceptable, and I think you should document everything, not just to protect yourself, but to make sure other patients never go through this." I lay there, hearing every word like it was a moral command. I'd spent years teaching generations of med students that ethics wasn't some abstract concept. It was what determined life or death right there in the ER. And now I had become the living proof of a blatant violation. On the second day after surgery, Marisol, the young nurse whose hesitant eyes I remembered from the ER, quietly walked in. She carried a small bouquet, set it on the table, and whispered, "I owe you an apology. I've seen Colin dismiss patients so many times. I knew he was wrong, but I was scared. I'm new, and I didn't want to get fired. That night, when I saw you collapse from the pain, I wanted to speak up, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. I regret it so much." Her voice trembled, eyes brimming with tears. I struggled to sit up and gently squeezed her hand. "Marisol, I understand. That fear wasn't your fault, but what matters is that you have the courage to admit it. This has to change." She nodded, her eyes shining even through the tears. I hadn't even caught my breath when, that same afternoon, another face appeared at the door. Jared Kim, a young resident with messy hair and dark circles like he hadn't slept in a week. He stood awkwardly, twisting a pen in his pocket. "Dr. Brooks, I need to be honest. I've seen Colin ignore plenty of patients, especially older women. I knew he was wrong, but if I spoke up, my residency record could have been destroyed. I chose to stay silent, and the night you collapsed, I saw everything. I still stayed silent. I'm sorry." I looked at him, and a flood of old memories surfaced, those timid first-year students once sitting in my lectures. All these years later, the system hadn't changed. The fear still passed down from one generation to the next. I swallowed hard, pain stabbing through my abdomen, and spoke slowly. "Jared, I once taught you that a doctor's courage isn't measured by holding a scalpel, but by standing up for the patient. I know the pressure is heavy, but you can't let fear be in control." He bowed his head, eyes red, but I saw a spark of resolve flicker within him. When the door closed, I lay still, my chest weighed down. This was no longer just my story. It was part of a much bigger picture. A system where young doctors stayed silent out of fear for their future, where patients were humiliated because of bias, where warning voices were smothered by power and ego. And I, through some cruel twist of irony, had become the victim that exposed it all. In the ICU, the steady beep of the heart monitor reminded me I was still here, that my role wasn't over yet. And maybe my real battle was only beginning. A battle not just to hold on to my life, but to break the vicious cycle of fear suffocating this hospital. After days in the ICU, tangled in tubes and wires, I started getting unexpected visitors. The first was a woman with short hair and a name badge that read clearly, Scarlett Moore, Patient Advocacy. She sat down beside my bed, opened a thick file, and got straight to the point. Dr. Brooks, I've been briefed on your case. This isn't the first time Colin Graves' name has come up in complaints. I raised my eyebrows, the knot in my stomach twisting. Not from the incision, but from anger. Scarlett flipped a few pages, her finger tapping lightly. In the past 2 years, at least 4 women over 50 have filed complaints against Colin for dismissive behavior and sloppy diagnoses. Every single one was filed under insufficient evidence. She handed me a card, then continued. You're not alone, and you need a strong insurance attorney. I've already contacted Carlin Gwynn. She specializes in cases of falsified medical records. She's agreed to meet you this week. 3 days later, Carla walked in, an Asian woman in a navy suit, her voice sharp yet reassuring. Your initial chart is filled with all the keywords insurance companies use to deny coverage: drug-seeking, hysteria, attention-seeking. If we don't correct this immediately, you'll be stuck with tens of thousands in medical debt. And trust me, this isn't an accident. It's Colin's pattern. Carla pulled another stack of papers from her briefcase. I've gathered statements from previous patients. One was sent home despite showing signs of a heart attack. Another nearly died from appendicitis. The common thread? Every single one was a middle-aged woman. And Colin was never disciplined. Hearing that, my blood boiled. I rasped through the pain in my chest. So what's the hospital planning to do now? Carla looked at me, then sighed. They'll try to settle it quietly. Some money, free treatment, if you sign a non-disclosure agreement. I let out a bitter laugh, the tug of pain at my incision no match for the sarcasm in my voice. They think a few checks can patch up the intestines I lost? This isn't about money. This is about justice. Colin can't keep trampling patients like this. Scarlett nodded in agreement. If you refuse, we'll escalate it into a formal investigation. But you'll need witnesses. And right then, as if on cue, Reed walked into the room. He looked at me, then said firmly, I'll testify. I saw your condition with my own eyes that night, and I saw Colin try to have security throw you out. This is my responsibility. The next day, Marisol came in carrying a small notebook. She opened it for me, neat handwriting filling the pages. Times, Colin's exact words, every detail of him refusing tests. I wrote it all down that night. I'm ready to submit everything. Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned with resolve. Later that afternoon, Jared showed up, looking like he'd gone through a sleepless night. He placed his phone on the table, pulling up a long document. I logged every minute. I can't stay silent anymore. Even if it costs me my career, I'll testify. Looking at the 3 of them, my heart swelled with emotion yet felt unbearably heavy. They had broken the circle of silence, and I knew there was no turning back. The internal investigation began. A small conference room, a long wooden table, the hospital board seated across from us. Carla sat at my side, her gaze cold and sharp as a blade. Scarlett laid out the files in front of her, while I sat upright, even though every twinge of my incision burned. The panel opened with a question. Do you have concrete evidence that Dr. Graves neglected the patient? Reed stood, his voice steady and clear. Yes. I personally witnessed Hannah Brooks unconscious while Graves ordered security to remove her. Marisol produced her notebook. Jared read from his notes. And then the hallway camera footage was played. Me collapsing on the floor, Sophie screaming for help, Colin standing with arms crossed, his face twisted in irritation. No one in that room seemed able to breathe. A board member tapped a pen against the table, eyes locked on the screen. This is no longer negligence. This is deliberate abandonment. Colin sat in the corner, his face drained of color, lips pressed tight. For the first time, I saw his arrogance twist into panic. When the meeting finally ended, I exhaled, feeling as if I'd just undergone another surgery. Only this time, it was to cut out a tumor called silence. A month after the investigation, I received the official notice. Colin Graves was suspended indefinitely, his file sent straight to the state medical board. 6 weeks later, the final verdict came down, his medical license revoked. Reading the words unfit to continue practicing medicine, I exhaled with relief, though my chest tightened with grief. Grief because this should have happened sooner, before so many others had suffered. The hospital wasn't the same anymore either. Notices were posted all along the halls. Every shift will now have a patient advocate. Patients have the right to request a second opinion without being labeled as difficult. I stared at that paper, caught between sarcasm and hope. After all my years teaching, I'd hammered home the importance of patient rights. Yet it took nearly dying myself for the system to finally move. Then came the day that mattered most. The hospital's main auditorium, packed to capacity. Hundreds of doctors, nurses, and interns sat in silence. I stepped onto the stage, the long scar still stretched across my stomach. The microphone felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just my hands trembling. I spoke, from the moment the pain began, to being dismissed, to collapsing on the floor while security was called instead of help. With every word that fell, I heard the faint scrape of chairs shifting, a few polite coughs, and a heavy silence that seemed to thicken the air. When I described Colin standing with his arms crossed while I writhed in agony, I watched faces bow, some blinking rapidly to keep their tears from falling. I ended not with a lecture, but with a truth carved from experience. Doctors aren't superheroes, but patients are never props in the play of someone's ego. The auditorium stayed silent for a few seconds more, then thunderous applause erupted. I looked down and saw Marisol wiping her tears, Jared nodding with pride, and Reed standing, his eyes saying, "You did it." And my life? Yes, I survived, but I wasn't the same. A section of my intestines was gone, leaving me with lasting consequences, eating carefully, a digestive system that would never fully cooperate again. Some days, all I want is a giant burrito, but my stomach protests like a cranky neighbor. So I've learned to laugh, to mock myself. This is the price of teaching medicine too strictly. The universe paid me back with my small intestine. But amid all the inconveniences, I carry a quiet pride. I've watched the hospital change, watched young faces grow brave enough to speak up. I know what I went through wasn't meaningless. And if someone were to ask me, "Do you regret it?" I'd answer, "I lost a few inches of intestine, but at least I regained my faith in speaking out." And you, if one day someone in a white coat dismisses you, remember this. You don't have to stay silent. You have the right to be heard.